Welcome to Tip of the Iceberg. I'm Johanna Laurie, and with me today is our favorite activist, a local activist here of a progressive sort, John-Michael Dumais. We're continuing a discussion that he had with Jim last time here, when they were talking then about scientific aspects of the coronavirus. And I think today what we'd like to do is weave these scientific aspects into the narrative, the ongoing narrative, and why we think we're at such loggerheads as a country between those who believe the narrative and those who don't believe the narrative. So to start off, I want to remind you, if you probably saw it, that in this week's Sentinel, as well as in all the major media, they're telling us now that the COVID numbers are going up and we're in a second wave. And I take issue with that, and I think so does John-Michael. So I'm going to let John-Michael speak to the second wave here.
Sure.
And how the media is really playing with that.
Exactly.
With that narrative. Yeah.
Well, as people may recall, at one point they were talking about deaths, death counts. Oh my God, how bad is this? Without any context, of course, of deaths from other sources. What were people dying from? Flus, pneumonias, tuberculosis. What about cancer? What about other kinds of deaths? There was no context. Well, in June, if you were people like us were looking at the curve, the death curve, it came right back down, right? Especially in the north. Now there was a little bump in southern states. That was sort of a mini second wave, but that's because that's the way viruses normally go from the northern to the southern climes as the season goes on. So there's a little bump there, although earlier on the southern states didn't have much.
What do you think, though, about now the Midwest and Dakotas, which are now being hit? I mean, and they're saying that the highest death rate in one day happened in North Dakota just this week. And what do you think's happening there?
Well, it's again, they stopped counting flu deaths, if you notice. So I'm not exactly sure what people are dying from.
That's my question too.
And then of course now we're into the flu season, right? Because this is now the leaves are coming off the trees, so all of nature's bounty in absorbing all that CO2, along with all the other stuff that's in the CO2, or at least a lot of it. Now that goes away, so the respiratory the annual season starts now. So deaths, you're going to expect deaths to go up somewhat.
And how are you going to tell in a way which is which?
Yes.
Because if you look at what the scientists who are not connected to the major media are saying, they're saying it's really, really hard to even tell what is the coronavirus from what isn't, even with the tests.
Well, so here's the problem with the test. Now, we don't know what the test is actually showing. We know that the CDC said that 94% of the COVID, quote-unquote COVID deaths had, those individuals who died, 94% of them had 2.6 comorbidities average per person, which means they were already chronically sick. And we also know that those died at life expectancy on average. So as sad as that is, it's expected that they would be dying at some point soon, and every year people die. So then the coronavirus test itself, or the PCR test, doesn't necessarily tell you anything. It could be measuring old dead pieces of the virus. It could be measuring other coronavirus colds, not necessarily coronavirus, depending on what the test is looking for. And then there's the problem with the amplification of the test. They use so many amplifications in the PCR that they could find almost anything, because all of us have trillions of viruses in and on our skin all the time. This is where the virome is actually a major part of who we are.
Yes, exactly. What about the other piece of that I hear a lot from friends and relatives is the people who are not dying but are getting sick, and sicker than they thought they would with the normal flu, and maybe are having residual heart problems and various things. How does that fit into this picture, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated picture, and I think we may not know until it's all over. But one of the persons I've been listening to is Dr. Zach Bush. He's got a video called The Virome. He does talk about this, and his take on this, and he's a triple board certified physician, so he knows what he's talking about. His take on this is that for most individuals, even the very sick ones, the virus moves through the system in about 3 days and gets pushed out. But for those who have these comorbidities, right, these chronic conditions, diabetes, COPD, heart disease, respiratory disease, that they are then in a more vulnerable position, and that what comes in with the virus, depending on where you are, can be all kinds of things like cyanide or other kinds of things, hiking in on the air pollution that gets connected to the virus. And also, these individuals have a higher susceptibility to coronaviruses because of the drugs that they're taking, the ACE2,
Yes.
ACE2 drugs that they're taking, which can enhance the sites in the body for something like a coronavirus to replicate. They found ACE2 cells in the nose, in the lungs, and other parts of the body. So it's kind of like a perfect storm of drugs that are being taken for these chronic conditions make these people more susceptible. And so we may not know till it's all over, but I'm not one thinking that we have a huge problem here in the general population. Obviously, older people are at risk. And in New Hampshire, it's 82% of people in nursing homes, 82% of COVID deaths are in nursing homes.
Yeah.
So it's not a general population
No, obviously. Although there are still some people who claim they don't have these comorbidities and they're young and all, and they're still getting very, very sick. So, but then that happens with viruses of all kinds. I think people do have to remember that this is not the only virus that attacks people.
Well, if you look at deaths from all causes,
Yeah.
right, you're not going to stop those deaths.
No,
You know,
no.
obviously you want to limit them, but people do die every
Yeah.
single day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we can also get into the question of what will really be the help of the vaccines, because this is, of course, what the official narrative is saying. Now the only way to really get this is to keep masking and keep doing all these things we tell you, and then when the vaccine comes, we'll get rid of these viruses. But I don't believe this, frankly. I don't believe this, and I don't think any scientist I respect does believe this.
Well, let's first take a look at
the viral. Back to the viral.
Let's take a look
yeah.
at the death rate. The death rate is 0.26, 0.25, 0.23, somewhere in there of everybody that gets the virus, and then and the infection rate may not be more than between 10 and 20% until we reach herd immunity. We're pretty much there. We know that Sweden is there, which never use masks, never use lockdowns, and aren't doing it now. Businesses stayed open, schools stayed open. So that's one thing. Another thing we have to be aware of is the suppression of things like hydroxychloroquine and other available treatments that would have reduced the death rate even more. But the point is, even without all of that, a 0.25, 0.26% death rate is not the kind of emergency that everybody needs to vaccinate themselves for. And then if you look at the history of coronavirus vaccines, they've been working on trying to create one for 30 years.
Yeah.
And because they mutate and all this other stuff, they don't really work. And this is the Cochrane Collaborative in 2010 came out with a study saying flu shots don't really do anything. These kind of vaccines don't do anything, really. They don't really help. And in fact, there's quite a bit of evidence to show that they're harmful.
Yeah.
They can make you more susceptible. We know that the DOD had a study in last year or the year before said the flu shot will make you more susceptible to 36% more susceptible to coronaviruses in general, not necessarily COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, but coronaviruses in general, flu shots. And then there are other studies showing that they do make you sick. They can make you sick. And they can kill you, by the way. Flu shots can kill you.
And yet they are pushing it right now. They're telling everybody to go out and get your flu shot.
Yeah.
And I remember I believe there's been a lawsuit going on in Italy over the flu shots, because there was a question as to whether or not people in nursing homes who'd had the flu shots were more susceptible to COVID and indeed then died of it. So I think there's a lot of question.
This is something Dr. Judy Mikovits talks about as well, that there's something in previous flu shots maybe that's predisposing people.
Yeah.
And since it happens to be those older people getting killed by the virus.
And who've gotten them the flu shots over a number of years
they would
now.
have been more likely to get the flu shot. So it's an interesting proposition, and certainly one I think will be looked at more closely.
Yeah. So we have this official narrative that's being forced down our throats 24/7 in the media. And I think it's important to look at what the media, indeed, the part that the media plays in all of this, because we know it, but we don't really recognize how this is impacting our lives and how it's making us think about this. And would you like to show them that interesting, he has an interesting graph, or is this a slide that we can show on?
Rick, if we can look at the risk perceptions replacement graph, and basically what it shows, looks like that you show the difference between how much each age group is worried versus their actual share of the total deaths from COVID-19. So you can see for those who are like 18 to 24, their worry is something like 400 times more than their risk. And for 25 to 34, it's something like 90 times higher than their risk. So there's this nonstop 24/7 media narrative, right? This nonstop media narrative, you can see is just heightening the fear, which is if you make everybody really afraid, way out of proportion to the actual risk, then they're going to be willing to do things like mask and social distance and do all the things that they're told they ought to be doing when the reality does not line up with the level of fear.
If you look at that final one, though, in my age group, the
Yes.
65 and over, that's pretty aligned to what's actually happening. So those people...
Yes, I would say that would be a
Yeah.
reality-based assessment for those over 70,
Yeah.
who the CDC says, over 65 it shows here, but CDC says over 70, your chance of dying from SARS-CoV-2 is about 5%, 5.4%. That's the latest CDC estimate. And again, I want to caution people, that's with the suppression of symptoms, and that's an estimate based on probably a lower threshold of herd, or a higher threshold of herd immunity. And it's shown that 8 out of 10 people do not get symptoms. They seem to be already immune via earlier T-cell immunity.
Also in this age group?
From all age groups across the board.
All age groups, yeah.
So but the 5% certainly seems scary, but once you look at the studies, for example, with hydroxychloroquine, zinc and azithromycin, or even ivermectin with doxycycline and zinc, and other things that are being used, they can actually reduce that death rate even in the older populations, as long as they get them early enough in the symptom onset. Now you remember that the CDC and the hospital said, stay at home. Well, if you get symptoms, stay at home until it gets worse.
Yeah.
Wrong advice. A lot of people died because of that.
Because of that,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
So if you want to look at why more people have died this year, I've got about 19 or 20 reasons why more people have died. That's not just a virus, but it's a lot of it comes down to the way we've actually responded.
Responded, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And that isn't really, everybody places, particularly the Democrats place that at Trump's door. But when you look at it, it's actually these experts themselves, because they have been just whipsawing us back and forth with information, and it has changed, and it keeps changing as to whether you should do this, whether you should do that, and the other thing, and how bad it is, and it's somehow, for me, it always gets down to the fact that they're not really willing to go on a panel with experts who don't believe this. They're not willing to actually say whether or not masks actually stop the spread, because they don't. It has been proved they don't. But they can keep you wearing masks as long as they say this will help, and not actually have to say it doesn't help that much, and it isn't a
Well,
cure
you may have seen Dr. Fauci sometime early on in this thing give a very clear scientific reason why masks didn't work. He said, you might think they work. They might stop a drop or two, but they don't really work. And for 40 years, the consensus of science was that for healthy people in a community setting, masks did not make a difference. Yeah. They did not make a difference. And cloth masks do nothing at all and probably do more harm because, of course, you're breathing in and out, they're getting wet. The viruses and bacteria are concentrating. You could breathe those right back in. Your nose has those ACE2 receptors, right? And those can then lead directly into your brain. There's not very much distance there for the virus to go.
And that's not a good thing.
Then you have problems.
And then you can really have problems, So and also I remember back when Fauci said that masks were primarily for psychological reasons.
Exactly.
It made you feel more like you were doing something.
Exactly.
Of course, he's backed away from that one. He doesn't say that anymore.
They all changed their tune in June when the death rate started to go way down. They changed their tune. Oh, now it's all cases. Now you got to wear a mask, and it just boggles the mind. And again, you just need to look at Sweden. Sweden didn't do that. Sweden isn't having any kind of bumper second wave because they achieved the herd immunity that social distancing and quarantining and lockdowns were supposed to simply put off, right? So if everyone stays in their house and they're not getting exposed to anything, first of all, if they're not getting sunlight, they're washing their hands every minute, then their normal workout of their immune system, which requires regular challenges, because the immune system is an adaptive It's a multi-dimensional adaptive mechanism, right? So if we're all staying in our houses and we're not going anywhere, then when they let us out, well, of course, then more of us are going to get sick, which is why I think we're seeing the second wave, because there was such a quarantining going on that those people were not exposed to anything. Had they been out and about all summer long, they could have benefited from herd immunity. By the way, if you get sick and you and I spend time together, I can benefit from the air you exhale because you're exhaling part of your immunity.
Yes,
if we spend time together and you're immune, you can help me if I haven't been exposed yet. You can help my system recognize what's going on. So this never gets discussed. Why?
No, I know. Why? It doesn't. And and also the fact that these, when they list new what they call positive cases, it's just simply that they're finding, or they think they're finding, that you have a positive reaction to the coronavirus, which means simply your body recognizes it. It doesn't mean you're sick. Positive case. A case is somebody who's sick. And we have changed the whole meaning of the word case.
Correct, yeah. It used to have a clinical meaning, but now it's just the PCR test. And by the way, now that the CDC is saying that the virus is totally airborne and can stay around for hours, it means as soon as a doctor or nurse pulls out that little swab to put it in your nose or your cheek, as soon as they pull it out and they're breathing, they could be contaminating the swab. The test kit could be contaminated if they don't open it in a clean room. The president of Tanzania tested a quail, a goat, and a papaya fruit.
I didn't know that.
All positive for COVID.
Oh.
Sorry. So please. And if you look at the deaths, increasing deaths versus cases, it's minuscule compared to. And of course, again, heading into the flu season, respiratory.
We'll see more things happen.
We're going to see more deaths. Anyways, and then of course you have fear. And then you have the nocebo effect, right? Which is our immune system. It's been shown that if we believe we're going to die, we can actually set up the immune conditions for dying. And that's actually been proven. There's plenty of studies. Please look it up. NOCEBO, nocebo effect. And we can go on and on. The fear, the whole thing that we were going to talk about today, just the fear itself can shut down. That constant chronic anxiety and fear actually shuts down your immune system. And can make you more susceptible.
And with all the things, and the thing is, doctors all over the world now are speaking up and saying that the cure is worse than the disease, and what the measures we've been taking have made already so many worse things happen in terms of health outcomes, and also certainly in terms of economic outcomes. And all this affects a person's immune system, because here you are struggling with trying to have a livelihood and worrying about being sick and what's going to happen to your children, your grandparents, and this right
all
there.
of the other untold effects are probably. It's been estimated that it will kill way more than the virus is going to kill. If you look at a lot of the foreign countries, third world countries that live and die on tourism. People are not making a living at all. It's terrible in those countries. So just the effect not only in this country, but we need to be aware of what this is doing to other countries.
And from the reading I've done, I haven't done too much of that on other countries, on the third world countries. They're not actually. They have hydrochloroquine, these various ways of dealing with it. They're not actually getting sick. What they're suffering from is the economic consequences.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, in Africa in particular, they have hydroxychloroquine over the counter because of malaria, right? Long-term malaria drug, very safe drug, by the way, despite how it was portrayed early on, and continues to be portrayed. And their rates are so low compared to Western countries, especially those that suppressed the use of hydroxychloroquine.
So there's a very telling thing right there.
So going back to what you were saying about the doctors, the Great Barrington Declaration, I know we talked about it before the show, was created by a professor of medicine at Harvard University, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, Dr. Sunetra Gupta, professor at Oxford, epidemiologist and expert in immunology and vaccine development and mathematical modeling of infectious diseases, and Dr. J. Bhattacharya, professor at Stanford University Medical School, physician epidemiologist. They got together and created a declaration called the Great Barrington Declaration, I think in early October, which basically says, stop doing this silly stuff. This is no longer a pandemic. We can protect the most vulnerable and yet continue life as normal. Up to this time, it's been signed by almost 44,000 medical practitioners and experts, and about 570,000 citizens. And of course, the mainstream would like us to think that these are all right-wing wingnuts, that don't care at all about people. But seriously, people, if you just look at Sweden, and what they've done, and you can just tell it's not necessary for us to be continuing on with this. Quarantines are not necessary. Masks don't do anything, but maybe make you sicker.
But in the mainstream media, they lie about Sweden. They pretend that Sweden has had all of these ups and downs, and of course.
Well, for months and months, but even now, now finally, the New York Times, somewhere early October, said, well, maybe they did things okay. So if you look at Sweden, now Sweden did have a high death rate on a per million basis, but they were like number 5 in the world for a time, and then they dropped to 9, then they dropped to 11, then they dropped to 13. So they, compared to other countries, which are now having the second wave, because Sweden just said, let's just expose our... Now, they could have done better as far as nursing homes and other places, but they didn't. They said, let's go the herd immunity route. We know that in every virus in the past, scientifically, we don't quarantine, and up till 2019, the scientific consensus was you don't quarantine or mask people for these kinds of epidemics. And they didn't. They looked at the science and they said, we're not going to do that. Let's just see what happens. Well, they're out of the woods now, and their death rate on a per million basis is dropping relative to other countries, which keep rising. All those other countries having quarantined and masked their population to one degree or another.
So let's get back again to how the media is handling all this, because it seems to me that we have typical manipulation propaganda techniques that are being used by the media to help keep this narrative going in a way which prevents people from actually doing these comparisons. I mean, as you say, they don't invite it, and every time someone appears, they call them a conspiracy theorist, or they do something rather to sideline them. They say that we're all involved with this shadow group called QAnon, which we aren't.
Right.
And even if QAnon does get some things right, maybe from time to time, this is not where anybody who opposes the official narrative is actually relying on for information.
Right.
So I think that's really important for people to know.
Exactly. Well, Eric Weinstein says that there's something called the distributed idea suppression complex, which is, I call it censorship incorporated or the censorship industrial complex. But it's this tendency for those in authority and those in positions of power to gatekeep the narrative, right, that doesn't work for them. And now we need to ask ourselves why the 24/7 death, disease, fear narrative has been going on, and who benefits
so
from
long,
that.
Yes.
Who benefits
This has been
from
going
that.
on for 6 months now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And the whole thing, got rolled out a year ago. So, this is quite a long time. And, of course, some people say, well, as soon as elections happen, it'll all stop. But personally, I don't see that as happening.
Well, you have to ask yourself, if the disease is on the downward slide, right? Why at that point do masking? How much time do we have left?
Yes, I think we got about 4 minutes.
All right, so maybe you can show the New Hampshire COVID-19 trends.
Yes. Yes.
And what this basically is showing is that you can see the death curve. Now, it's gone up a little bit since October because of respiratory viruses, I believe, regular flus and stuff. But if you look at the death curve, by the time Governor Sununu said, everyone wear a mask or else, back in August 13th.
No, he didn't say that. No, but he said that was up to the community. So,
right, and then of course the city of Keene also said it. That was we were down to a death a day or less, right? So if they start to enforce those kinds of measures at the end of a curve, then what is the exit strategy for those measures? There isn't one, because it can only go up from there, and so they're going to say, well, you got to keep doing it then. So it's a lot of people think this is a psychological psyop, as it were, a psychological operation to demonstrate that people in positions of authority and power can control the masses. Now, early on, I think there was justifiable fear, but then later on, there are some international drivers of people wanting to do a financial reset, kind of a globalized government, and they've been pushing this, and it's not a conspiracy, it's in black and white. If you go to the World Economic Forum, look up the Great Reset.
Okay, so maybe let's give the places where people can find information about this now, because we're coming to the end of our time
yeah,
today.
Rick, if you want to show the website URLs, there are some websites in New Hampshire. It was one we just started, Johanna and myself and others have started, riseupnewhampshire.org, where you can find the petition, Save the Children petition, which we're hoping to send to the Sentinel and other papers, which are saying, you know, children with a survival rate of 99.997% and not spreaders of the virus, according to lots of studies, don't need to be wearing masks, don't need to be social distancing, certainly not outside, certainly not jumping up and down on the playground or climbing up Mount Monadnock, please. Then there's reopennewhampshire.com, which includes a number of petitions saying this, we don't need to keep doing this, and then 8.3.com, which is another great group that's doing a lot of rallies around the state. And then, Rick, if you want to show the Challenging the Pandemic narrative, that's a copy of my ongoing, evolving ebook. It's about 179 pages. Right now, you can find it at that URL. And I try to cover some of the basics that we've talked about here today, a lot of information about the PCR tests and other aspects of the pandemic narrative. I talk a lot about fear and narrative control and how this could happen in America, because people just, oh, that can't be, that all these departments of health and all these experts could be wrong. Well, they were wrong, and the data proves it, Sweden proves it, yet they continue on. Ask me why.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we have to end this interesting conversation for today, but I'm sure after the election we'll have a lot more to talk about.
Good.
So we hope John-Michael will come back. So you can see this program tonight at 7 p.m., Friday at 7:30 a.m., Saturday at 2:30 p.m., Sunday at 3 a.m., and Monday at 6 p.m. So join us for those showings, and join us again when we come back together, and we'll have John-Michael again talk with us. So
thanks for having me.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.